I'm Sarah Martin. Growing up, the contrast between me and my twin sister Molly was as stark as night and day. She was the golden girl, and I was decidedly not. Our dad, a stern university professor, was deeply immersed in his work with books and lectures. Meanwhile, our mom was the epitome of a dedicated housewife, tirelessly guiding us to follow her traditional path. From as early as I can remember, being at home felt like enduring an endless critique session. My parents had a vision of the perfect family that didn't include a daughter who preferred band t-shirts and keeping to herself. "Sarah, why can't you be more like your sister?" was my mom's favorite line, usually delivered whenever I showed up at breakfast with my headphones on, trying to block out the world. Molly, on the other hand, basked in approval. "I just don't understand why it's so hard for you to wear a nice dress and smile more," she'd say, flipping her perfect hair over her shoulder. It was like she came from a different planet. One particularly grueling Saturday, as we prepared for one of Dad's faculty parties, a mandatory snooze fest, I decided to rebel in the smallest way I knew how. I donned my darkest eyeliner and a pair of boots that definitely didn't meet the appropriate standard. "You're not going out like that, are you?" Mom caught me on the stairs, her eyes darting down to my boots as if they were covered in mud. I shrugged, my usual defense. "Don't see why not." She sighed deeply, a sigh that spoke volumes about her disappointment in my nonconformity. "Please, Sarah, just this once, can't you try to fit in? For the sake of pretending we're the perfect family." I shot back, tired of the endless arguments. "It's not about pretending, it's about showing respect for your father." Mom's voice took on that sharp tone that meant business. Molly, overhearing the exchange, trotted down the hallway, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a judge approaching the bench. "Mom's right, Sarah. It's not that hard to look decent. Why do you always have to make things difficult?" "Maybe I don't want to be a clone of you, Molly," I snapped, my face heating up. I hated these arguments, hated being compared, but most of all, I hated feeling like the odd one out in my own home. Dad appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his brow furrowed in disapproval. "Sarah, go change now. We're leaving in 10 minutes. His tone left no room for argument. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. The disappointment in his eyes was enough to make me retreat to my room, swap my boots for bland flats, and wipe away half my eyeliner. As we drove to the party, the car was silent except for the classical music Dad insisted on playing because it was calming. I stared out the window, the trees blurring past. In that moment, I promised myself that someday, I'd live a life where no one could tell me what to wear, how to act, or who to be. Someday, I'd be free from these expectations. My room was the only refuge in the house where I could pretend I was somewhere else, anywhere else. Unlike the rest of the house, which was filled with my parents' choices, my room was mine. It wasn't much, just 4 walls covered in sketches and music posters, but it was my escape from the reality of my family's expectations. One evening, as I tried to lose myself in a playlist of my favorite bands, Dad knocked on my door and marched in, his face wearing that all-too-familiar frown. "Sarah, turn that noise down. And why haven't you studied with Molly today? You both have exams coming up," he said, his voice firm. I pulled out one earbud and looked up at him, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been studying, just not with Molly. I learn better on my own." Dad shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "You know the rules. Your sister gets good grades, and you should be doing the same. I don't see why you always have to make things difficult." "It's not about making things difficult," I replied, frustration bubbling up. "I just don't see why I have to do everything Molly's way. Can't I have my own way of studying?" He didn't answer, instead shifting his complaint. "And those friends of yours, I saw you with them at the cafe yesterday. I don't think they're a good influence." You should be spending time with the daughters of my colleagues. They're more suitable. I felt my temper rise. Suitable for what? For you. Because they talk about economics and pretend to enjoy those boring university gatherings. Before he could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway, her voice sharp as she joined in. Sarah, your father is right. Those girls come from good families, they know how to behave. They're the kind of friends you should want. I stood up, facing both of them. What if I don't want friends chosen for me? What if I want to pick my own friends, decide what I study, or even what I want to be? That's enough, Sarah, Mom said, her tone final. You know your future is with the university. Your father has made sure of that, and after you graduate, you'll need to start thinking about settling down. We've already discussed this. Settling down. The words hung in the air like a life sentence. You mean like Molly, just thinking about being someone's wife? Is that all you think I'm meant for? Mom's face softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. We want what's best for you. Following the path we've set out will give you a good life. A good life, I repeated, bitterness lacing my words. Is it a good life if it's someone else's idea of good? They didn't answer, they didn't need to. We all knew there was no point in arguing. They had their plans, and they expected me to fall in line, just like Molly. We were like two sides of the same coin, always together but never on the same page. At university, where Dad taught, the differences between us became even more pronounced. Molly thrived in business management, the golden child, always nodding along in lectures and asking the smart questions that made professors nod approvingly. I, on the other hand, was stuck in the same program, but it felt like wearing a shoe on the wrong foot, awkward, uncomfortable, and just plain wrong. One afternoon, as I slogged through a mountain of textbooks in the library, Molly breezed in, her notes perfectly organized, her smile bright. Hey, Liz, you coming to the study group tonight? Professor Hall mentioned he might drop by. It could be good for us to show face, she said, her tone light but insistent. I glanced up, feeling the heavy weight of her expectations. No, I don't think so. Those things aren't really my scene, you know. She frowned, setting her books down with a thud that echoed her disapproval. It's not about whether it's your scene, Liz. It's about making the right impressions. You need to start taking this seriously, we're graduating soon. I shrugged and turned back to my notes. I am taking it seriously, just not in a way that makes me miserable. Why should I bother pretending? Because, Liz, sometimes you have to play the game to get ahead. You think I enjoy all of this? She gestured to her perfectly tabbed textbooks and color-coded notes. It's not about liking it, it's about doing what's necessary. I shook my head, pushing back my chair with a scrape. Well, maybe I'm tired of doing what's necessary according to everyone else. Did you ever think of that? Her voice softened, but her eyes remained firm. Liz, I'm just trying to look out for you. Dad's not going to be around to sort things out forever. What are you going to do if you keep pushing everyone away? Maybe I'll figure it out on my own. Maybe I don't need to follow Dad's roadmap, or yours, I shot back, feeling a surge of defiance. Molly sighed, her frustration evident. You're so stubborn. Just try, okay? For me, if not for yourself. Show up tonight, talk to Professor Hall, it won't kill you. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just my annoyingly perfect sister, but someone who actually cared in her own way. Fine, I'll think about it, I conceded, not ready to promise anything more. Thank you, she said, her smile returning. It's not that bad, you know. You might even like it if you give it a chance. Doubt it, I muttered, but I knew I'd lost this round. For Molly, I'd show up, sit through another boring discussion, and nod at the right times. It was just a few hours, I told myself. How bad could it be? As it turned out, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Professor Hall was surprisingly engaging when he wasn't lecturing from a podium. I even asked a question, which earned me a shocked but pleased look from Molly. Later, as we walked back to our dorm, Molly nudged me. See? Not so terrible, right? But that fragile peace didn't last long. In our final year, Molly introduced us to her fiancé, a lawyer 10 years her senior, already well established and exactly what our parents had always hoped for. Mom and Dad were over the moon, praising Molly for making such a smart match, and immediately turned their expectant eyes on me. Now, Sarah, it's your turn to find someone suitable, Dad said one evening over dinner, his tone implying that my time was running out. Mom nodded enthusiastically, already planning out my life as if it were another one of her well-organized home projects. Think about your future, dear, someone who can provide for you. Who has good standing. I remember staring at my plate, feeling the walls closing in. Molly's wedding had been meticulously planned by Mom, down to the last detail, from the bridesmaids' dresses to the floral arrangements, showcasing her perfect vision of family prestige. After the wedding, Mom frequently visited Molly, doling out advice and ensuring her life played out just as she had orchestrated. Watching this, I knew one thing for certain: I didn't want my life tailored by someone else's hands. One day, I was walking down the street, lost in thoughts of how to escape the life my parents had envisioned for me, when I heard the deep rumble of a motorcycle approaching. Curiosity pulled me toward the sound. That's when I saw him, Bob, with his leather jacket and carefree smile, pulling up beside me. "You look like you need a ride," he called over the roar of the engine, a playful twinkle in his eyes. I hesitated, glancing back toward the path home, then at his outstretched hand. What did I have to lose? Sure, why not? I replied, my voice a mix of nerves and excitement. Climbing onto the back of his bike, I felt a rush of adrenaline as we sped away. The wind whipped through my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh. Bob shouted something about showing me his world, and I held on tighter, not wanting this moment to end. We stopped at a diner frequented by bikers, where over burgers and fries, Bob told me about his life as a welder, his passion for bikes, and his love for the open road. It was so different from anything I was used to, raw and real. Don't you get scared living like this? I asked, my voice barely above the clatter of plates and chatter around us. Scared? No, it's thrilling. You never know what's around the corner. Isn't that better than having everything planned out for you? He replied, his eyes lighting up with each word. Over the next few weeks, we met secretly. Each ride on Bob's motorcycle pulled me further from the life I was supposed to live and closer to the life I wanted. The speed, the adventure, it wasn't just about the thrill, it was about feeling alive, feeling free. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a secluded overlook, Bob turned to me. Sarah, I don't just ride to escape. I ride to feel alive, to make every moment count. With you, every moment feels like it's worth something. I leaned into him, my heart beating fast. I've never felt like this before. You make me feel free, Bob. He smiled, pulling me closer. Then let's not go back to just existing. Let's live. 6 months with Bob felt like a lifetime of moments I'd always dreamed of. The day he proposed under the stars, with the gentle rumble of his bike in the background, my heart screamed, yes, before my mouth could form the word. It was perfect, except for one looming hurdle, my parents. I wrestled with the fear of introducing Bob to them. He was everything they disapproved of, his rough edges, his wild spirit, his simple yet content life as a welder. But love bolstered my courage, and I decided it was time they knew. The day I brought Bob home, he was clad, as usual, in a leather vest, black t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a bandana. I loved that about him. He was unapologetically himself. As we walked up the driveway, I could already feel the weight of my parents' judgment pressing down. The moment we stepped inside, Mom's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. "What in the world, Sarah?" she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Dad's reaction was harsher, his words as sharp as knives. "Who is this, and why is he dressed like a thug in our house?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Mom, Dad, this is Bob. He's the man I love. We're getting married." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dad turned to Bob, his tone dripping with disdain. "Married? What do you do for a living, young man? What are your qualifications?" Bob, bless him, didn't waver. "I'm a welder. I took some specialized courses after high school. I work hard, and I make an honest living." The look on my parents' faces was a mix of horror and disbelief. Mom looked like she might faint. "A welder, Sarah? You can't be serious," she murmured. Dad's voice rose, anger flaring. "You expect us to give our blessing to this? To throw away your future for a welder?" I felt my resolve harden. "Yes, because he makes me happy. Isn't that what should matter?" "But the life you'll lead," Mom started, her voice trembling. "It will be the life I choose," I shot back, my own voice gaining strength. Dad shook his head, his decision clear. "We cannot and will not support this. If you choose him, don't expect to be a part of this family." The finality in his tone broke my heart, but it didn't change my decision. Bob squeezed my hand, giving me the strength to face them. "Then I choose Bob. I choose us. I choose my happiness." Mom's eyes filled with tears, and Dad's jaw clenched tightly. "If you walk out with him, don't bother coming back," Dad said, his voice cold. Walking away from my parents' house with Bob, my heart was a whirlwind of emotions, pain, relief, excitement, and fear all mixed together. The night air felt different, like each breath I took was a step further into a new life. We rode in silence for a while, the steady roar of the motorcycle beneath us the only sound. When we finally stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, Bob turned to me, his face serious. "You sure about this, Sarah? I mean really sure? There's no going back after tonight," he said, his eyes searching mine for any hint of doubt. I nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. "I've never been more sure of anything. Being with you feels right. It feels like what I'm supposed to do." He smiled that reckless, charming smile that had won me over the first day we met. "All right then, let's do it. Let's start our life together." Inside the diner, we found a quiet booth in the corner. The waitress brought over 2 coffees without asking, and we sat there, planning our next steps. "So, what's first?" I asked, stirring cream into my coffee, watching it swirl and blend. "We'll need to find a place to stay, at least for a while," he said. "Then maybe look for jobs." "I have some buddies who can help us get started," Bob replied, his tone practical but optimistic. "It's going to be tough, isn't it?" I said, more of a statement than a question, as the reality of what we were doing began to sink in. Bob reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "It might be, but we'll handle it together. Tough is nothing new for either of us, right?" I couldn't help but laugh, a short, sharp burst of genuine amusement. "Right. Together." We spent hours in that diner, talking and planning. Every so often, Bob would toss out an idea that sounded so wild, so free, it made my heart race. "And maybe one day, we'll save enough to take that road trip across the country, just you, me, and the open road." I like that, I said, allowing myself to dream bigger than I ever had before. Riding back into the city, we began our search. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. We found a small apartment on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Bob found work at a local garage, and I picked up shifts at a nearby diner. Life was hard, but it was ours. We made do with what we had, and every night when we came home to each other, it felt like we had everything. Months later, we decided it was time to make it official and got married in a small, intimate ceremony. I held on to a sliver of hope that my family would show up, that they would see how happy I was and let go of their prejudices. But the chairs reserved for them remained empty, and no congratulatory messages came. Despite the sting of their absence, the day was perfect, because it was ours. Over time, I grew incredibly close to Bob's mom. She welcomed me with open arms, calling me her daughter and filling in the gaps left by my own family. Her warmth and acceptance healed some of the wounds left by my parents' rejection. Things finally started looking up for Bob and me after he completed additional diving training and became a certified underwater welder. His income shot up to $150,000 a year, which made a world of difference. We managed to buy a townhouse in a nice area, the kind of place I'd always dreamed about but never thought I'd actually live in. I started working as a dispatcher in Bob's company. It wasn't just a job, it felt like I was part of something important, supporting the man I loved and building our future together. On weekends, we'd escape the city on his bike, roaring through winding roads and taking in breathtaking views of nature. Those moments, with the wind in my hair and his warmth against my back, were pure bliss. Living nearby, my mother-in-law became a frequent visitor. One such afternoon, while Bob was tinkering in the garage and I was making us some coffee, she arrived, looking a bit troubled. "There's been some ugly news," she said as she settled down at the kitchen table. "Something about a professor at the university involved in a harassment scandal." My heart skipped a beat. "Oh. Did they say who it was?" I tried to keep my voice steady, dreading the answer. She shook her head. "No, they didn't mention a name on the radio, but you know how these things go, it's probably all over the TV by now." Nodding, I flicked on the television and tuned into the news. Sure enough, there was a report on the scandal, and as I feared, my father's face appeared on the screen. The anchor detailed the accusations against him, and I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. Turning off the TV, I sat down heavily, trying to process the news. Bob came in, wiping his hands on a rag, and saw my face. "What's wrong, babe?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "It's my dad. He's been accused of harassing a student." Bob's expression hardened for a moment before he came over and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Sarah. That's tough news. How do you want to handle this?" I shook my head, feeling lost. "I don't know. I mean, what can I even do? It's not like we're close anymore." He squeezed my hand, understanding. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you. We don't have to figure it all out right now." I decided to wait and see how things unfolded before making any decisions. Whatever choice I made, I knew I'd have Bob by my side, and that was the reassurance I needed to face whatever came next. Life had been peaceful until that unexpected afternoon at work when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. I hadn't seen my parents in a long while, and the sight of them stirred up a mix of emotions I thought I had put to rest. Both of them looked dramatically changed, the scandal had taken its toll. Mom had lost a lot of weight and looked years older, while Dad appeared broken, a shadow of the stern man he once was. My mother spotted me and rushed over, arms open, as if nothing had happened, as if years of distance and disapproval could be bridged in an instant. But I couldn't embrace her, not now. Instead, I stepped back and took Bob's hand, seeking strength in his presence. "Sarah, it was so hard to find you," Mom said, her voice cracking with emotion. Dad, ever the gruff one, cut to the chase, his voice harsh and bitter. "I was accused unfairly, you know. I went to your sister's husband for help, but that bloodsucker wanted a fortune. Your sister sided with him, and now they've kicked us out. We need your help." I stared at them, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Help? After all these years, you show up and demand help? We have nowhere else to go," Mom's voice was desperate. "They've disowned us too. We thought maybe we could stay with you." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Stay with me? After you disown me? You made it clear. I wasn't your daughter anymore," I said, watching Dad's face turn red as his old temper flared up. "You owe us, Sarah, after all we've done for you," he shouted, his voice thick with anger. "That's where you're wrong," I interrupted, feeling Bob squeeze my hand in support. "I don't owe you anything. You threw me out because I chose my happiness over your demands. And now you want to move in and pretend like we're a family." The situation was spiraling out of control, and I could see people watching, a crowd beginning to form. Mom started to cry, her sobs loud and drawing even more attention. "You're being ungrateful, after everything we've done for you," she accused through her tears. I took a deep breath, my decision clear. "No, Mom, I'm not ungrateful. I'm free and happy. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." As we walked away, I heard Dad yelling, but Bob leaned over and quietly told the security team, "Don't let them come here again." The following months flew by, filled with love and peace. We welcomed a son, marking a new beginning in our growing family. My parents never came back. That day in the parking lot was the last I saw of them, and while part of me grieved for what could have been, I knew I had made the right choice for myself and my family.